This is Aaron Turner from Sumac and Hydra Head Records, and you are listening to the New Scene Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the New Scene. I am your host, Keith, and we're back with another brand new episode. And on the show this week, we have Dave Grossman, bass player of atmospheric post-metal greats Rosetta, hailing from Philadelphia. I've really enjoyed this band a lot over the years. Think ISIS, think Neurosis, think that post-metal, post-rock influenced, sweeping, atmospheric sound. It's great stuff. David is also frontman of New Miserable Experience, which is a new electronic post-punk influenced band. They just released an excellent LP this year called Absent Lovers, so make sure you check that out as well. We also have our Artist Spotlight interview of the month with John DiGiorgio, drummer of Mean Jesus. Mean Jesus are an excellent hardcore band out of Virginia Beach, so we talk all about that band and their latest singles. And John was also drummer of Converge during the Poacher Diaries era of the band, so we talk all about that as well. That's all coming up shortly, but first, here's how you can support the New Scene. Rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a main channel with full video episodes and a clips channel with clips from select episodes. We have shirts for sale at our store at Death Wish Inc. Pick one up. It's a great way to support the show. And you can follow us on social media at New Scene Pod. Also, don't forget to support Iodine Recordings. Jerome's Dream will be performing with Orchid on February 13th at the Great American Music Hall in San Francisco. The Iodine Mystery Box is available until the end of the year. It comes in 8 sizes and you'll receive records from the archives, which includes all releases. Essex Coffee Roasters is once again offering the Post-Hardcore Blend by Iodine Recordings. It's chocolate, it's nutty, it's full body, it's delicious. Pick that up at iodinerecordings.com or essexcoffeeroasters.com. And Her Head's on Fire just released a cover of Just Like Honey that features Mehe of No Man. Make sure you check that out. And finally, don't forget to support our sponsor for the month of December, 30-something Records. 30-something Records is a German independent record label based in Berlin, Germany. It was founded by Matthias and Maren Bacher in 2019. They've got reissues and new releases from exciting artists all over the globe, including Far, The Fire Theft, Star Market, Pop Unknown, Orange 9mm, and more. Salil, So What? The new discography from Enemy of the Sun is streaming everywhere right now. And you'll really dig this if you're a fan of the noisier side of hardcore. Think Early Dillinger, think Dead Guy, think Breathe or Resist. Those are awesome bands, and Enemy of the Sun is an awesome band, so check it out. And Belgian folk artist Philemon just dropped a brand new single called Hold On, so make sure you go check that out. That's from his upcoming debut LP called Waste. And there's 2 vinyl variants up now for pre-order, so go grab one. And limited quantities of Super Bloom CDs and cassettes are back in the 30-something store. Super Bloom are an excellent post-hardcore alt band out of New York City, so go pick something up from them while supplies last. For more information, head to 30somethingrecords.com or follow them on Instagram at 30.something.records. All right, so check back in with me in segment 3. We'll do a quick recap of the conversation with David, and make sure you stick around until the end of the episode for the interview with John from Mean Jesus. But right now, we are going to speak to Dave Grossman of Rosetta and New Miserable Experience. Enjoy. All right, we are here now with Dave Grossman. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, Dave, it's great to have you here. You've been doing a lot over the years, and currently too. Rosetta, we have a new LP from New Miserable Experience called Absent Lovers, which I'm really enjoying, and we're going to talk about all that. But Dave, first I want to ask you, how are you doing today?
I'm great, man. I literally, so I teach Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. That's my primary job. So I literally just taught 3 classes and then hopped on here with you, so I got nothing to complain about.
So that's your primary job.
Yeah, I am a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belt. I've been training now for 13 years. Next year will be 14 years. Yeah, it's I love it. It's I pretty much I think that the thing I love most in the world is my daughter, but then after that it's jiu-jitsu and music. And the order sometimes varies between love of music versus love of jiu-jitsu, but yeah, I'm lucky that I get to do that as my main source of work. It's a blessing every day.
Yeah, no office, no boring spreadsheets or Teams calls or anything like that, right?
I actually do. My part-time job is actually working at an independently owned physical therapy office, but it is very laid back. So the woman who started it, and the office is called Primal Physical Therapy, she kind of worked in the more, I guess, for lack of a better term, corporate physical therapy setting. And she was like, this doesn't actually get people better. So she was like, I need to start a cash-based PT office and really focus on getting people better because the system's all broken. So that's my other job. But it's about as punk rock as a physical therapy office can get. So like it's not a normal office job at all. So again, I'm blessed with my work thing. And so I'm there part-time, and then the rest of the time is jiu-jitsu. So again, I got nothing to complain about. I'm living the dream.
That must be a nice career flow you have going there, right? You can rough them up in the class and then send them to the PT office.
Yeah, sadly. Well, depending on whose point of view, I guess, sadly, right?
So you've been training for about 14 years. How many years into training did you start teaching?
So actually kind of early on, so probably about 2 years in, but it was like really just helping out with kids' classes, and then eventually started to teach kids' classes. And then as I got higher up, started to teach some of the beginners adult classes, and then eventually I made the transition to it being my main job. And that actually happened around the time when the opportunity came to work at that physical therapy office, so I could sort of balance it out. Before that, it was, Rosetta, for a period of time, we were touring a fair amount, but nothing crazy. So lots of odds and ends jobs for a period of time for all of us. Then, it's obviously, I mentioned having a kid. I had a kid, so I was like, I can't really tour too much. And then I had that brief window of time where I was working more normal 9-to-5 jobs, but it's just not for me. No offense to anybody who lives that life. And some of it is obviously where I was working, the two more standard 9-to-5 jobs I had. I was like, this is just not for me. I need something different. I need to scratch that kind of artistic itch, I guess.
Yeah, the only reason I can tolerate the 9-to-5 job I have is because I do it from home, which I've been doing since 2019. So if I had to go into an office every day again, I don't know, I'd become a waiter or a bartender or anything to just like work, the least amount of hours for the most amount of money and get out of there.
Yeah, I mean, so back when I was working the more 9-to-5 job thing, that was really before remote working was a thing. But I worked at what was called assisted living. So it's not like a nursing home, but it's sort of similar to that, but the people are more independent. And my last role for that company I worked with was a position called the business office coordinator. And it was like you had to be in the office, and the hours sometimes it was just outrageous. And I was like, this is like, it just wasn't for me. Again, maybe I would have felt different if the remote work was a thing, but it definitely wasn't back when I was doing it.
Where do you live?
So I'm right outside of Philadelphia in the suburbs. It's called Lower Merion. That's the township or whatever. But I'm like suburban Philadelphia. It's not too long for me to get into West Philadelphia and Overbrook areas, which I think you're familiar with Philadelphia, so you kind of know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I grew up in Bucks County, and then I lived in Philadelphia for 9 years, and I've been in Brooklyn since 2012. So Lower Bucks and a little bit of Warminster and Doylestown I'm familiar with, but Lower Merion I've heard of, but I'm not too familiar with it.
You're not missing out on much, but it's okay, that's where work is, so it kind of just makes sense for me to live out here.
It's one of those Pennsylvania suburbs I've heard of,
Yeah, I think lots of people know of it because of Kobe Bryant, because
Oh yeah, is that where he's from?
Yeah, he played or high school basketball at Lower Merion High School.
That's how I know it, right?
Yeah.
So how old is your daughter?
She's 10.
Okay. And are you married?
No.
Okay.
No.
Is it just the two of you?
So I have her for pretty much part-time custody, and then she's with her mom the rest of the time.
Okay. Is that difficult? Or, I mean, has it been long enough that it's like we have a system worked out?
I mean, I think that being a parent, period, is difficult no matter what the situation is. But yeah, I feel like everything's good. I think between all of us right now, which is a good place to be, for sure.
That's good. That's good. When you had a child, was it difficult to transition from the more band touring lifestyle into parenthood?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, so I think post having a kid, I think we did 3 weeks in China. I did that tour. I think I went to Russia maybe 2 or 3 times with the guys. I did Japan once, and then maybe some flying stuff in the United States, but all the longer touring outside of that, I just had to sit out of. They hit the road pretty hard from the last full length we put out in 2017, Utopioid. They hit the road pretty much for 2 years without me. And I think, yeah, the only show I played behind that tour, which is the last show that the band has played, period, live, was Decibel Beer and Metal Festival, it might have been 2019, I think. So that's the last show that the band has played, period. It was us and Deaf Heaven playing Beer and Metal Fest, Decibel Magazine at the Fillmore.
Wow. So how do you book a tour in China? That must have been unbelievable.
So it was. I don't even really remember. So I think that we did the tour in 2014, but the initial offer came in 2012. And yeah, it was a process getting the visas. I think the guy he lived in China and he reached out to us and he was like, would you guys have any interest in touring China? And we were like, how many bands have toured China? Yeah, sure, let's do it. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the most surreal experiences the band had. I mean, honestly, Russia was a weird experience too, but mostly in a good way. And Japan's one of the most special places in the entire world. So
yeah, because you hear of bands going to Japan, Australia, but never China. Like that's just wild to me.
Yeah, it's not easy. Are you familiar with the band Caspian?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, I think they've done China maybe 3 or 4 times. They're also, honestly, one of the best bands to ever exist.
Absolutely.
Like, I know they've done China. I know Deaf Heaven has played China because I think Deaf Heaven was coming over a few months after us. We saw like flyers for them in a few towns. I don't even know if I can think of anybody else besides them, though. Like Deaf Heaven, Caspian. I'm like, I don't know who else has done it.
How is it over there? Are people happy to have you, to see you? Because, like, I guess the US and China are at odds to some degree, and there's plenty of propaganda over here, so you never know what to believe. But what was the experience like? I
mean, it was bizarre. Like, I don't know if some of it was the novelty of the fact that American bands don't really come over there, but like all the shows were pretty packed and like lots of passionate people about it. But some of the people were like, it's not even like they were familiar necessarily with the music because I don't think that they really had a good way to access it. But like, they were just excited to see live music. It was just special. Like there was a certain level of like enthusiasm that I just really don't think I had experienced anywhere else, where these people were just like, they wanted to be there to see live music and just were really existing in that moment. It was just I don't know. It was a really powerful, weird sort of trip.
Do you have a guide when you're over there? I imagine it would be hard to get around if you don't.
So Matt's wife is Chinese, so she came with us. But then the guy who booked the tour came with us, and then he had a friend who was kind of co-tour managing. So it was kind of like 3 people to help manage the 4 of us.
How about your experience in Russia? Another place not a ton of bands get to, at least that I've heard of, but that must have been cool.
Russia has always been great to us. So I think, again, man, I'm old, so the years start to bleed together. I think I did Russia 4 times total, and those guys did 1 trip without me. And really passionate crowds every night over there. I stick out like a sore thumb because I'm not a white man. So I never ran into any issues with anything. Everybody was always nice. I don't know if we'll ever be able to go back, but all the shows were always incredible. The trips were always incredible over there. The treatment. Yeah, nothing but good things to say about the experience in Russia.
Nice. So where did you grow up?
So when I was really young, we lived in West Philadelphia and University City areas of Philadelphia. So yeah, that's like most of my childhood. And then we eventually, my parents moved us to the suburbs. So I got the suburban experience after that. But I pretty much, yes, lived always more or less in the Philadelphia area.
And what's your heritage?
So my mom is African American, but it sounds like there's also some Filipino stuff in there that she found out about much later. And then my dad was a white Jewish man. So
that's a good combination.
Yeah, it's a little unique. I mean, maybe not so much more anymore, but like obviously growing up, because I'm 41, as a kid, I didn't have as many people that were in the communities I was living in that were kind of mixed with the same background as I did. But I mean, now I look back at it, I'm like, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, because what suburb did you grow up in?
So I grew up in this little town called Narberth when we moved to the suburbs. But like I said, when I was younger, we were in West Philadelphia and University City area of Philadelphia.
Okay, because I grew up in Pendle, Bristol, Levittown, Lower Bucks, and it was very, very white. The schools I went to were very, very white. So if you saw a person that wasn't white, it would be like a big deal, which seems ridiculous now because now I've lived in Philadelphia and New York City, and it's just everybody's just together, so it's not such a big deal. But your parents, like when I think about your parents in the year 1982, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly not as common.
Yeah, exactly. Not at all. Right. So, yeah, I mean, completely different world back then. So
how was it growing up for you? I mean, did you have a hard time in school? Did you have an okay time in school? Like, how was it?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, everything was okay. I mean, I definitely remember getting picked on a little bit, but nothing that was all that crazy. Yeah, I mean, yeah, for the most part, I don't have any big negative things to say about my childhood. It was all pretty good. I mean, I do remember always feeling a little different, but nothing crazy. Like, because it would be like, yeah, like, when you start first getting into your own things, the things I was first getting into, first it was like the grunge stuff when I was probably like 11 and 12. So I, started getting the Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, and then you start to get, I'll listen to Metallica, I'll listen to Danzig, I'll listen to Pantera, I'll listen to Megadeth, and then you start to get, I'll listen to Vision of Disorder, right? And it starts to work itself, I'll listen to Sick of It All. So as I was getting into that stuff more and more and more, I was like, nobody really in these communities are like me at all at that time. But occasionally, right, I'd run into somebody, I'd be like, okay, so... But yeah, that definitely led to a little bit of stuff. And then I was also like a massive, technically I still am a massive comic book nerd. So I think that also made like people like, you're not supposed to be reading comic books when you're 15 years old. That's for little kids. And I'm like, okay, whatever,
Yeah. See, I'm happy to hear that you didn't have such a hard time because I did. And I was into video games, comic books, weirder music. And I was just like, I had a really rough time in school. Like everybody just turned on me. I kind of deserved it too, because I was like mean to kids and was trying to be cool.
Yeah.
But it was not an easy time. And then once everybody found out what I was into, it was just like piling on,
Yeah. I mean, somehow I avoided most of that, but it might have just been, man, it's funny now because now I won't shut up. I talk too much all the time, but I pretty much never, I just would more or less just stick to my few friends, and I didn't say a lot to anybody, which is funny. Like actually what made me sort of start coming out of my shell is when Rosetta first started doing stuff out of state, where you're like, okay, so if somebody isn't friendly, we're not going to have a place to sleep and we're going to sleep in the van sitting up. So it sort of like transformed me in my 20s into being like, okay, I guess going to start being more personable.
Yeah, that's what I'm going through now too, because for a very long time I just got really drunk and high, and that made me personable, or repulsive depending on who I was talking to, I guess, but that brought me out of my shell, and I did that for a long time, and then I had to stop. So now it's like I'm learning how to do that all over again, and it's kind of still figuring it out. But in terms of being in a band again now, yeah, like that really helps, because I'll go to a show, I'll meet somebody that's been on the show or somebody that knows somebody, and then I can talk to them,
Yeah. I mean, it's like, that's the thing, man. I mean, again, I'm not saying anything that you probably don't know and haven't probably heard a million times on this podcast. It's like, this community is very supportive of each other, but if you're not willing to be a little bit friendly, it's just not going to happen. So
exactly.
Like, yeah, but it's like, I mean, it's crazy. You can literally tour all over the world and get food to eat and places to sleep just based off being like, oh, I play this kind of metal, hardcore, punk rock, whatever sort of more DIY based music. And you always just have this community anywhere in the world. It's beautiful, man. It's
the best community out there. I love it. It's been like the thing for me for most of my life.
I mean, I agree, man. I've honestly, it's probably one of the most positive things that has ever happened to me, along with like jiu-jitsu stuff, where it's just like both those communities. I'm lots of times blown away with how many just good people there are that are willing to support each other and help each other.
So you talked about some of your trajectory with heavier music. How did you get more into it? Did you go to local shows? Did you discover local bands? Like, what was your thing?
Oh, man. So there was this record store that was just like an independent record shop. And I don't even remember what it was called. But I remember
Where was it?
It was in the town Narberth that I was living in at the time. So I must have been like, I don't know, 14 at the time or something like that. Maybe a little younger, maybe 13, but something like that.
You ever go to Disconnection in Ben Salem back in the day?
I did not. I've never even heard of it, actually.
Okay, that was my shop. But anyway, continue.
I feel like everybody has a shop. Yeah, so, man, I was listening to, like I said, like the grunge bands or whatever, and I actually regret this now. But at the time, I didn't. I had the Oasis album with Wonderwall on it. And I was just like, I'm going to go and trade this in for something different. So I went to the store, because I'm sure you remember, man, you used to be able to take a CD and go and trade it for another CD. So I went there and I was talking to the guy and I was like, I want to trade this Oasis CD. What should I get? I like Alice in Chains and all this stuff. And the guy was like, you should get Danzig 1. I don't know why this guy was like, you should get Danzig 1. And then he started telling me all about the Misfits and Sam Hain and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I'll take this Misfits thing and I'll take Danzig 1. And that was kind of like Danzig was kind of a little bit of the gateway. Strangely enough. I mean, at that point, I definitely had Metallica, Pantera, and probably a Megadeth thing. But like, no offense to those bands. Those bands aren't quite as rooted in punk rock as Danzig was. I mean, despite what anybody thinks of Danzig, the Misfits are one of the most important punk rock bands of all time. So yeah, I feel like I think that was kind of what like started to lead me into that stuff more and more and more. Because then I would just go back to that. It's like I don't look back on Danzig 1 the most positively right now, but at the time I was like, oh, this guy gave me something cool and awesome. So then I would just go back and talk to him more, and he was introducing me to cool stuff. Like even like he's the person who introduced me to Bjork. So just like really diverse, and he'd like give me these things. He'd be like, doesn't matter if you don't like it, just bring it back a week later and we'll swap it out for something else.
See, that's amazing, because I'd have money for the one CD I could afford, and if it was bad, you're just stuck with it for a while.
Yeah, so I think the reason why this worked at this store so well is that it was almost all used stuff. So I think that they were just like, well, what's the big deal? And I also think they might have just been excited that this, like, they're like, oh, it's a kid coming in here all the time and talking to us and being open to what we're trying to introduce them to.
So how do you start playing in bands? Tell us about some of the lead up to Rosetta.
So, I mean, I don't even really, like I said, all the stuff starts to blend together. So the drummer from Rosetta and I, we had known each other for sure by that point. Probably at 13, we met each other or something like that. And he played drums already at that point, and then I started playing guitar, which I'm a very poor guitar player, sadly, still to this day. But I had taken piano lessons before that. But I just think at some point we were like, oh, let's start a Deftones cover band. I don't even remember how old we were at that age, but I think that was the first thing we did was a Deftones cover band with some friends. And then somehow that transitioned into me actually singing for the Deftones cover band for a little bit. But then we were like, well, I don't really want to do covers anymore. And then we created our first band that was doing original stuff. But I think at that point I was singing and maybe playing guitar. And he was, man, I don't remember. He might have played bass briefly. And then we moved everybody around that was friends and we changed what we were doing. So then I was just singing. He moved to drums and we had a couple different friends. So that band was called Sense Fracture, which is a terrible name. And then BJ, who's the drummer for Rosetta and also he's a New Miserable Experience with me. He was also playing with Matt from Rosetta in a band called Sunday Rest. And Matt was doing vocals in Sunday Rest and playing guitar. And we would play shows. And then at the time, Armine, who's the vocalist in Rosetta, was playing in a band called Mikado, which the guitar player from Mikado is also a New Miserable Experience with me. So all these relationships go back quite a bit. We were playing a show at a ballet studio in this little town called Havertown, which is again suburban Philadelphia. And somehow this story has been mistold multiple times, where somebody says we were going to sound like a grindcore band, but that's not actually what happened. We were like 19 years old, and me, Matt, and BJ were talking, and we were like, we should start a band that sounds like Botch and Converge. And I was like, I'll play bass, even though I didn't own a bass at the time. And I was like, Matt, why don't you just play guitar? BJ, you play drums, and we'll ask Armine to sing. And it was just literally, that's how Rosetta started. And then we've just been a band since.
So here's a good question. How do you go from let's start a band that sounds like Botch and Converge and then end up sounding like Rosetta, which is not a far cry from those bands, I would say.
It is, yeah. So I think there's a few factors. And then also Eric, who is in the Rosetta now, he didn't join the band until like 2014. So for anybody who's listening to this is wondering where he comes into the picture much later. But yeah, so that was the idea. But then we got together and that's just, it didn't come out that way. So it just is what it is. Like, I mean, we definitely all listened to Neurosis at that point and listened to ISIS, but it wasn't intentional. It's just literally how it came out. And we just never looked back. And that's just kind of like the natural sound that happened when we would get together in a room.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because you definitely hear Neurosis, you certainly hear ISIS, those type of atmospheric metal bands. So you got together and just playing, and that's just what happened.
Yeah, it's just completely organically and natural.
Did you guys all listen to like ISIS and Neurosis and that type of thing?
Yeah, we all did to varying degrees. But again, it's like we started playing, and I don't even remember. Probably Matt had the initial idea for a song, and then it just sounded that way. And then as it just started picking up that's what comes out when we get together in a room organically.
That makes sense, though, because, my band now, I said it's going to sound like this, and I had a reference point, and it doesn't sound anything like that now. And I'm part of me is like, no, but I really want it to sound like this. But the other part of me is like, hey, we're together. This is what's coming out. I just got to go with it.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually more common than people think. Because like this, I think about this stuff all the time. Like, I have this idea in my head that nothing is truly original and that everything we're doing is just collage, even if it's lots of times unintentional collage. And it's like the collection of your influences and the other person's influences create like this sort of organic thing that is just a part of you. And then when that person's stuff mixes with yours, it now becomes this other thing. So like the ISIS Neurosis thing has always been a big part of things that gets referenced for Rosetta. But the thing is Matt and I have had this conversation. Other people have had these conversations with us. The bass playing is very influenced by The Cure. The Cure is the most important band in songwriting to Rosetta for me. And Matt has this kind of weird edge like U2 guitar thing going on at the same time. And it's kind of like, I really love The Cure. And I, as far as I know, Matt really listened a lot to the U2 when he was younger. And it's like, but we also listened to those other bands. It's kind of like the collections of those things being put through the lens of those other influences kind of made the Rosetta sound.
Yeah, I've heard that quote from you, like the art collage, and I think I'm with you on that. I think true originality is very, very. It might not even exist, but if it does, it's very rare. I think some people are just better at collaging than others, whether that be intentional or not, right? Because a band could come out and they're playing like some kind of 90s grungy riff that you would hear on a Hum record, right? And sometimes I might hear that and be like, oh, I've heard this a million times. I don't care. But another new band could come out and play that same 90s grungy Hum riff, and I'll be like, this is the best thing I've ever heard. So it just depends on the band.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing, is sometimes the bands are deliberately being derivative. And that's not quite what I think you and I are talking about when we're like, it's collage. That's just like straight up ripping something off poorly.
Yeah.
Versus being like, so like if somebody asked me what the 5 most important musical acts were to me in my life, Jeff Buckley would be on there. Jeff Buckley's like a massive influence. The Cure would be on there, without any doubt. Alice in Chains would be on there. And then probably the other 2 things would maybe be, man, this is interesting. I actually haven't really thought about this before. So probably, honestly, ISIS would have to be on that list for me, for sure.
Yeah.
And then probably the last thing is like something like Prince, but the Prince story is an interesting story. So I wasn't doing my homework when I was a sophomore in high school. And
why?
I was just angsty for some reason. And my English teacher, it was his first year teaching. He was 23 years old. His name was Mr. Neary. He said he knew I was doing the reading, but I wasn't turning in the homework. And he said he would lend me a bunch of CDs if I turned in my homework. So I agreed to the deal. And he's like, I know you like all this more heavy, weird stuff, but he's like, just give this Prince album a shot for me. And I was like, okay. And that was the thing that opened me up back to listening to non-heavy things. Because at that point, I was just like, no, I listen to like metal and punk rock and hardcore, and that's it.
Interesting. Yeah, because in 10th grade, I was listening to like Korn and Marilyn Manson and Deftones. And, you know, if someone gave me a Prince CD, I would have been like, get this out of here.
I pretty much, that's what I was thinking at first, but I gave it a shot because I was like, this dude's so cool. Like, he was giving us weird things to read. Like, I remember there was like one story that was like, it was like a story about somebody sleeping with a dead body. And I was like, I was the only one who picked it up in class. I was like, this is about somebody sleeping with a dead body. This is about being a necrophiliac. And he's like, it is. Why? How did you pick that up? Nobody else did. I'm like, well, all these details in there. So he was just like a cool teacher. So I was willing to take the chance on Prince because of him. And that's what like allowed me to kind of be like, oh, okay, so I can just listen to whatever I want to listen to, regardless of genre. And it's okay. So like, it's funny because this teacher is the reason, honestly, probably that I got into lots of the non-heavy music stuff, and is probably a large reason why I play music, but he's also the reason why I ended up going to college, because he's the reason why I started doing my homework again. And that's what allowed me to go get into college at Drexel and get a degree. So,
oh, wow. What'd you end up getting your degree in?
I have a bachelor's in psychology, which is virtually worthless, but
yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
Unless you go get like the doctorate, it's no good.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Rosetta's 2013 LP, The Anaesthete.
Yeah.
I read some interesting things about this record. Now, going into it, a lot of bad things happened, right? We lost all of our money. We didn't have a practice space. The studio you were going to go record at flooded, right? There was like a lot of bad things going on. Yeah,
so we had some money left, but all the money we had left was just enough to do the recording. So we actually had a fair amount of money. And some of that was because Kylesa was nice enough to take us out on tour. We did a cool tour with them in Fight Amp, which I strangely enough, I actually forgot about that tour until I was talking to a friend 2 days ago. And I was like, oh yeah, we did that tour with Kylesa back in 2011. It was us, Fight Amp, and Kylesa. I was like, I forgot about that. And we played a lot of, like, that was like the peak of their popularity. So we played like a lot of really cool venues.
That's, you must be up to a lot of cool stuff if you did a tour with Kylesa and Fight Amp and forgot about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, man. It just feels like a different lifetime ago now. I mean, that's so it was either in 2011 or 2012. So we're talking now almost, 14 years ago, possibly 13, something like that. So it had been a while. So I was like, oh, I forgot about that. But yeah, so we had a fair amount of money, but our van died. So on that tour, the van got messed up because it was a tour during January.
Oh, this was this the vegetable oil powered van?
No, we're about to get to that. So we had a different van, and that van, the damage to that van happened on that tour. We spent $2,000 at the end of it to get the van fixed for whatever else we had going on. But then that van got hit, so it got totaled. So we got some money from the insurance payout. And then we bought a veggie oil van that lasted for about 12 shows or something like that. And then that died. So all the money that was spent for that van was just a loss. There was nothing we could do with that.
And the guy who you bought the van from just disappeared, right? There was no chance of getting the money back.
Yes and no. I'm not going to sell that person out. I'll just say.
See, that's what I was getting at. I wanted to see if we were ready to sell this notable person out. And I don't know who it is, but I've read that it's someone people know. But anyway, continue.
It is somebody people know. But
yeah,
that person used to be signed to one of the biggest metal labels out there. But they'll remain nameless. I don't need to sell them out. There's no need to.
What are they up to now? Has their life like gone to shambles, or are they still doing okay? Do you know?
I have no idea, honestly. I mean, I haven't heard anything about them making music or anything about what they're doing in a long time. But yeah, I mean, it just is what it is. So we had enough money to record, and then Andrew Schneider, his studio got destroyed in like Hurricane Sandy. So we have that money left, no practice space. We're practicing and writing the album in an unheated garage, and Matt and I are full of rage and hate. And that's pretty much how the album came together. Matt and I literally spent a lot of hours full of anger talking about just being angry at being in a band, angry about making music, angry about like just every aspect of it. And we were like, this will probably be the last thing we do. And we like literally would like have conversations of like, I want the song to sound like this or this and this and this. And yeah, him and I just spent hours talking and going back and forth about stuff. We wrote it. And then Andrew Schneider is really close friends with this guy, Joel Hamilton. And he owns a studio called Studio G. And Joel was nice enough to hook Andrew up and us up and let us record in the main room of Studio G, which is like a world-class recording studio. And yeah, then we self-released the album, Pay What You Wish, and we made a crap ton of money, and that was that. And the band got to continue going, and we were happy again about playing music.
How did you keep going through that? Because I'm thinking about the insurmountable odds that are stacking up and everything going wrong and being in a freezing garage, and I hate being cold, and the neighbors are calling the cops on you over and over again. How did you keep going through all that? Was it going to be the last record?
I think that it was this idea that we honestly thought that this was it, that this was just going to be the last thing we did. So I think that's kind of where the motivation really came from. It was like, okay, so this is probably it.
And that record, as you just mentioned, ended up doing very well. And it kind of carried the band financially from that point forward, right? Like this was a turning point where we were not hemorrhaging money anymore.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's pretty much the decision has been made, and we've done this since then. It's like we just make our music, Pay What You Wish, put it on Bandcamp, Pay What You Wish. We held out on putting stuff on streaming for a while, but then eventually we just caved in and did that. But it's like we go and we put out the albums, Pay What You Wish, on Bandcamp. We put it on streaming ourselves, and then we license out stuff to labels that have good relationships with to do the physical stuff.
Do you ever think about that though? Because that's pretty incredible that, fortune smiled on you with that one.
I mean, I'm kind of blown away by it over and over again. Like, I mean, it's really more a testament to the fact that people care about the music that Rosetta makes, because that's the only reason how that's possible. Right. So, yeah, it's kind of, I'm blown away by it even still to this day, because like at the time, the bands that were doing that if you remember back then, Nine Inch Nails did something like that. Radiohead did. It wasn't like all that common at that point. So I'm like, we're not like those bands. Who's going to want to just send us money if they can get it for free? And it was, again, I'm still blown away by it. You know, it really speaks a lot to the amount of passion that the people that listen to Rosetta have.
So Eric joined on guitar in 2014. You were pushing for him to join the band on guitar, right?
Yeah, so we had toured a lot with Eric's band at the time, which was called City of Ships, and there was a couple things. I was thinking that at that point I knew I was going to have to take a step back. So
that was going to be my question. Did you know?
Well, yeah. So I knew I was going to be a parent at that point, so that was part of it. And I was like, okay. The other thing is just that I felt like we needed to change something so the songwriting dynamic would change. And we actually, at the time, we just thought it was just going to be a one-off thing. We were like, we'll just write one album with him, but it'll just be something that changes the sound somewhat for this next record. And then he's just been in the band since. But like, him and I were really, really close just from all the shows and tours we did with City of Ships. And I mean, ultimately, all of us are really close with him. But at that point, I was really close with him, and I think Matt was really close with him. So when I suggested, there was like a little bit of pushback, but everybody was like, yeah, let's give it a try. Like, he'd already guest appeared on 2 of the albums, and we already knew how it worked on the road with him. So it just kind of worked out. And again, it's one of those things that we just never looked back. It was like he just fit right in.
So let's talk about your new band, New Miserable Experience. When does it get started, and how does it get started?
Yeah, so Josh was in that band Mikado, which was a pre-Rosetta band that Armine, the vocalist of Rosetta, was in. So him and I actually released a kind of Dillinger Escape-ish plan album on Translation Lost back in like 2011, maybe 2012, called Hykosin. And we did that, and we played some like local shows, but I was always just, I didn't really have time because Rosetta was still pretty active at that point and working odds and ends jobs. And back then, I think I was dating a girl in Washington State, so I would fly out there sometimes too. So it was just like, it just kind of fell apart. I was just like, really didn't have the time to dedicate to it. But him and I are really good friends. So COVID happened and nobody's really doing anything, obviously, right? So it was like, oh, well, I'm sitting at home a lot. I have time to work on music. So I was like, why don't we do something? So Josh and I started talking about that. And we're like, we'll just file trade. And I was like, well, let's ask these 3 guys if they'll do it. And they all said yes. But then, like most things that happen, they actually didn't end up being involved because they just were doing whatever else they wanted to do. I don't really know. So eventually I was like, well, I know BJ will say yes. So I was like, I'll ask BJ. And then Brett, who is in Revocation, is one of my best friends. He used to play in a band called The Postman Syndrome that eventually became a band called East of the Wall. So that's a relationship that goes back like over 20 years and always one of my closest friends. So I was like, and he's one of my favorite musicians and bass players. I was like, I could play bass myself, but why don't we just ask Brett to play bass and I'll just sing? And we kind of just wrote 5 songs, trading files, and that was that. We put out an EP on Translation Loss, and then Brody, who I kind of knew just very more as like an internet friend, but he is a Rosetta fan, and he had toured a lot with Brett, so he's from the band Rivers of Nile, and Revocation had toured together a lot, and he hit us up saying he really liked the EP, and I was like, why don't you just join the band? So then we wrote the full length that we just put out about a month ago with Brody. And that kind of is how things kind of came together for this project.
Yes, the full length is called Absent Lovers. It just came out in October on Translation Lost, so I encourage everybody to go check it out. So I saw an interview with some of the guys online somewhere, and they were talking about how video game, specifically PlayStation 1 soundtracks were an inspiration.
Yeah, so that's Brody and Josh. So who are the 2 guys that pretty much do almost all the guitar work and all the synth work. So honestly, they're really writing the bulk of the music. So pretty much for the full length, half the songs are songs that started as Josh ideas. The other half are songs that started as Brody ideas. Yeah, they both are just, they're into that stuff. That's not so much a world that I'm as familiar with.
Yeah, you seem more literary.
A little bit, yeah, for sure. I mean, I've definitely played video games at different points, but not anything that like is like these guys are referencing things. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm like, I know, I've heard of John Madden football and Halo. I'm like, those are the games I know about. Like, I'm not really a much of a video game guy, but like that is definitely things that those guys are into a lot, and you can hear that in some of their decisions that they make with the synth parts, I feel like.
So how does it work with the creative process? I mean, at this point, are they writing songs and sending them to you to lay vocals down over? Are you helping write stuff? Like, how does it work?
So for the most part, what happens is that, again, it either starts as a Brody idea or a Josh idea, and it varies how fleshed out the ideas are, and then it starts getting passed around. And there's not necessarily an order it gets passed around in. So sometimes it's like, oh, it comes to me first, and then I start writing vocal parts, and then it comes back later and they've chopped it up and they're like, this is how I think the song should sound. I'm like, okay. And then I go back and I flesh out the vocal part more and write full on lyrics and then record it for real eventually. Sometimes it goes to BJ first for drums. Sometimes it goes to Brett for bass before it gets to me. But yeah, it's kind of just, we full on do the file sharing. The five of us has actually only been together in a room one time for about 9 hours.
Is that to film the music videos?
Yeah, film music videos and do the promo photos. So that's it. That's the only time the five of us have been in a room together all at the same time.
So you haven't played any shows yet?
No.
Do you plan to?
There is a little bit of conversations that we might play a few shows next year. We'll sort of see. I mean, we're in the process of writing another full length, which won't be out until 2026 most likely, but we might play a few shows next year and then we'll see what happens from there. There probably won't be any long touring for the foreseeable future, but we might play some shows here or there. Again, Brody tours a lot. Rivers of Nile is a serious band, and Revocation's a serious band that tours a lot too, so it's not the easiest thing, but we've at least brought it up a few times more recently than it had been brought up in the past.
So if we're going to play shows, we probably have to get into a room and figure out how it's going to work out live, right?
Yeah. So we probably end up going to Richmond, even though all of us, 4 of us minus Brett, all live in Pennsylvania, but Brett has a space down there that we could use to practice. But we've talked about this. We're like, if we did it live, we're like, we should not sound anything like the records and sound like a loud rock band in the vein of Nothing live versus sounding how the records sound.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's a very good idea.
That's kind of where I mean, we've had this conversation a few times. Like, yeah, just pick the songs that you can translate like that and just be okay with being like the live experience is vastly different from the recorded experience.
Like, that band Have a Nice Life?
Yeah.
Yeah, like when you hear those records, like I imagine them live and I just imagine like guys in cloaks and like candles and like low synths and like just like a weird cult experience. But when you see video of them live, they're a band.
Yeah.
They're a rock band. They're like, it's like a hardcore show. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's not what I was expecting.
Yeah. So I think if we end up playing, that's kind of what we'll probably end up doing. That seems like it makes sense. And like, honestly, it's weird because I mean, that's ultimately what we've always done. We've just been in loud bands for forever. That's like our thing, So it's like, even though we're kind of doing this, for lack of a better way of describing it, kind of like Depeche Mode synth rocky thing. That's just not how we would play music live. Like, it just doesn't make sense almost.
No, I think that's a good call. Plus, like, the hardcore kid in me always wants to see a loud band. So
I'm with you, man.
Yeah. Have you had a lot of downtime from music? Like, what's your involvement in Rosetta now versus, putting this new band together?
So that's a good question. So Rosetta recorded and released Utopioid in 2017. So I was involved in the whole writing and recording process of that. So I play bass on that. I do a little bit of vocals on that. Sower of Wind was a companion album for that, which I didn't do anything on. But honestly, that's not all that different from things in the past. Like, there was like a companion thing for Wake Lift. I didn't do anything on that. The second disc of Galilean Satellites, I don't think I played a single note of anything on that. So like, it's not all that uncommon for me not to get involved in that more ambient texture stuff. There was the companion album, Silver Wind. I didn't do anything on that, but those guys toured a lot for pretty much 2 years straight without me. In between that, they did an EP that really only had 2 new songs and a reimagining of another called Terra Sola. I had nothing to do with that, but we have a full length that we're actively finishing up recording right now. I've been involved in the songwriting and the playing. Like, my bass parts are done. I don't know if I'm going to do any vocals on it. I might do some harmonies, but I'm actively involved in this next record, which does not have a name yet, but we spent pretty much, I think, maybe a week in Connecticut at Will from Psalms / Constant Studio. And we pretty much recorded all of the guitar and bass back in August. And then before that in July or maybe June, man, time flies and it's hard to keep track of things. BJ recorded the drums and we did that at the church that Matt works at. So yeah, pretty much the music is like 95% done, but we have to write vocal parts. So
now, your involvement in these recordings, how does it work? Do they contact you and say, we need you for this? Will they sometimes record something and you don't hear about it until it comes out? Like, how does it work?
No, we're getting in a room and jam band. So yeah, we legitimately just get in a room and turn on the amps and play. And then that's exactly what we did for this. Same, no different than we've pretty much always written. Like, usually it's like, so again, going back to the Anaesthete is where we first really started having deep conversations about what we wanted things to sound like and the emotions we wanted the music to portray first. And then we would turn on the amps and try to create those sounds after those conversations. But that's pretty much how the band still works. So yeah, we were getting into the rooms, discussing some things, and then just hammering away with the amps blasting us in the face.
I like it. That's how I still do it too.
Yeah, I mean, there's something magical about that. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, I don't know. It's like, I say this a lot about like the reason why people like jiu-jitsu, but I think this is also the reason why people like yoga a lot. It's like forced mindfulness, and that creative process of getting in the room with the amps on, blasting each other in the face and being loud. It's like nothing else exists except for the moment together with the people you're creating. So like the whole world shuts off. And there's a lot of magical things that just happen in those environments that you can't recreate any other way.
So let's remind everybody, New Miserable Experience, the Absent Lovers LP is out now on Translation Lost Records. It just came out last month, and we want everybody to check it out, right?
Yes, yeah. Much appreciated if you guys give it a listen.
It's a great LP. And then we've got a Rosetta record in the works, right?
Yeah. So I think, in theory, that'll be out maybe 2025. Worst case scenario, early 2026. But yeah, we'll see. It's really a question of how long it takes us to write and record the vocals for the next Rosetta full length.
Excellent. Well, Dave, I mean, you're up to a lot of great stuff. I love the New Miserable Experience record. I'm looking forward to hearing the new Rosetta. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, and hopefully maybe we can cross paths. Obviously, I go back a long way with Armando, who you're playing with.
Yes.
In memory entry. Like, so, yeah, I mean, he was in Balboa, who, man, I must have, at this point, I've probably known Armando for over 20 years as well. So, and what you guys are doing is very cool as well. Armando is a very, very, very awesome person and very talented musician himself. So I can only imagine how much fun you're having working with him.
It's the best. He's the best. Yes, and thank you for that. Yeah, once I hit stop, that's when the networking begins. We're going to plan tours, shows. It's going to be crazy.
Awesome.
And there you have it. David Grossman. Excellent conversation. Good to talk to Dave. Good to get to know Dave better. We know some of the same people, and I've seen Rosetta before, back in the day when I was still living in Philadelphia, and always been a fan of them. Excellent stuff. And New Miserable Experience is a great band as well. I like these newer post-punk Depeche Mode style bands that are popping up. It's a great sound. I highly recommend that everyone check out Absent Lovers, and I'm definitely looking forward to more from Rosetta and New Miserable Experience. So thank you so much, Dave, for coming on the show. Don't forget to tune in next week. We have our Best of 2024 episode. So I'm going to review my favorite records of 2024 with you. And I also have an exclusive interview with the recipient of our Best Record of 2024 award. So that'll be exciting. But right now we are going to speak to John DiGiorgio of Mean Jesus. Enjoy. All right, we are here now with John DiGiorgio. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Good to be here.
Yes, it's great to have you here, John, because I've been talking to you for a while now, and you're doing awesome things in Mean Jesus, and you've done a lot of stuff before that too. Drums, everybody. Drums. Very important to distinguish that. So, hey, John, where do you live in Virginia?
I'm in Norfolk, so it's like we're one city over from Virginia Beach, if that's a more noteworthy name.
Okay. And did you grow up around there too?
Yeah, like grew up in Virginia Beach, actually, and moved here when I was, 25, maybe.
Okay. What brought you there? Why did you move there?
I don't know. My wife and I, we were just dating at the time. We wanted to get a house in this area we liked here, or an apartment in this area of Norfolk that we liked. So, we looked around. I worked in Norfolk anyway. It just seemed like it's so small anyway between Virginia Beach and Norfolk, but, the venue that was having shows at the time was in Norfolk instead of Virginia Beach. Not that was like a huge factor, but it weighed in. So, just social life, all that stuff.
What venue?
So at the time it was Kogan's, which is now a pizza place, but that's where all the hardcore bands and everything would kind of stop by back then.
And John, there's actually an interesting story of how we met and started talking. So please tell that story from your perspective.
Okay, so I think I had just gotten back. My family took a trip to Boston, and I hung out with Nate for one day when I was there. We went to Salem. Nate from Converge and everything, because he's an old Virginia Beach guy, so we go way back. And we were walking around town and ran into Kurt Ballou there. So then that's the backstory piece that maybe you didn't even know. But
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So then, like a week later, I was listening to I was listening to a different episode of your podcast, and then I was digging through who you've interviewed, and I saw Kurt on there, and I was like, well, that'd be cool. I just saw him last week. And I popped that episode on, which I think it was like a bit older at the time. And you asked like what happened to the drummer from like the Poacher Diaries era, right? Which was me. So then I got kind of excited. I sent you a message on Instagram. And I was like, hey, I'm alive, doing this and this or whatever. I don't remember what I said. It was probably, knowing me, it was probably like paragraphs longer than it should have been. But, that's who I am. So then I think you like replied like, I'd forgotten all about it. And I think you probably replied like a month later or something. And it was cool. So
yeah, that's when I discovered once you hit a certain threshold on Instagram, it divides your inbox up into like 3 categories. And a lot of the messages get pushed to like this third mailbox that I didn't even know about. And then I saw your message and I was like, oh, it's him. Because I always wondered what happened to you, because I remember when Poacher Diaries came out, it was so good. I just loved it. I still love it. I still listen to it. And then I think I saw that Converge tour you were on at that time, which was one of my favorite tours I've ever seen and one of my favorite Converge tours I ever saw, because it was just a perfect time where they were doing everything. They were doing like Caring and Killing. They were doing Petitioning. They were doing When Forever Comes Crashing, and then Poacher Diaries, of course.
Yeah, it was cool. And I really liked the set list we played back then. Like every night we would end with Saddest Day, which was so fun to play, and I would be so wiped out from the songs before, but when we played that one, it was like my energy meter went back up because like, I was a fan of the song years before being in the band. So it was really cool to be able to play that.
Was it intimidating coming into that band? Because look, I've joined bands before, but it's usually friends or people I know or something like that. But if I imagine joining like a Converge or a Cave-In or a Dillinger or a band of that caliber, it just seems impossible. I'm just like, no, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, of course. Like I think I looked at dates the other day. I'm really into keeping like events on a calendar, so I get a reminder every year. And I think I tried out, I remember it was Kurt's birthday I tried out on. And I think 2 weeks later, it was my first show. So it was nuts. Like, luckily I didn't have like a career or anything then. So I had the time, I could play all day and just learn the songs. But that part of it alone that was the most terrifying thing. Like meeting, I had met Kurt because a band I was in before, he went on tour with us. He was like managing Piebald, or he was like the whole, I don't know, the tour organizer or whatever. But I had met him from that. And then, so it was, I'd already known him, and I knew Nate obviously from high school and stuff, but it was pretty terrifying, man. I was so nervous. Like I was impossibly nervous before we played, and I probably played everything 8 times faster than it should have been. But at the same time, this is what I wanted to do with my life at that point. Like I wasn't really doing much at home. I was kind of waiting to get a shot to play with some band. So it was perfect for that. Like, I think my parents were starting to worry. Like I was just sitting around. I lived out. My sister and I had a house, and I think I could barely pay rent because I didn't really care about working. And this absolutely needed to happen right when it did. So that was super cool timing. And I was like, I'm really thankful that played out the way it did.
How old were you when you joined the band?
I think I was like 29. So I would have been maybe 21 at that point. I feel like I was a teenager because I was a very immature 21. In my head, I feel like I was 17 maybe, but I was 21.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this. I was really young for my age. When I was 21, I wasn't doing anything. Like I had just gotten my first full-time job. I just moved out of my parents' house. But when I moved out, I didn't have a job or money. And I think my friend lent me money for like the security deposit. And then I got a job like as I was I was a mess. I was I was a mess for a long time.
I was a mess. I was just all I cared about was drums. And I care a lot about drums now. It's like my whole thing, I love playing and stuff, but, and I probably,
look at all those drums behind you.
Yeah. This is I have more too, sadly, but this is just like my drum rack of things not being used right now. But, so it was, I needed that to actually experience, because that was like the dream in high school. Like, I don't need this stuff. I'm going to be in a band, whatever, so it was cool that it actually happened. And Converge they're not the Converge of today back then, right? Like we played, that was their first time in Europe. So some of those shows, some of them had a really good turnout, but I think we played like Switzerland, and it was just us and like the sound guy and a few people working there. Maybe my memory's way off, but so there were some. It was hit or miss. So they hadn't blown up yet. So it wasn't like I walked into that gig, in the present era by any means. But it was still super. Boston shows, of course, were just absolutely nuts. And that was where my first show was.
In Boston?
Yeah.
Wow. How did it go?
It was such a blur. I remember setting up the drums a little bit, and one of my friends from Virginia Beach was with me, and he took like the only picture that I have from it still. And it was cool. Like Hot Water Music played it, and I was like such a fan of them, so it was awesome kind of catching up with them. But yeah, I've been straight edge since I was 15. So I don't have any kind of like, I was too high or whatever to remember, but I have no memory of that whole thing, man. So like I should, but I don't.
So you've been straight edge since you're 15.
Yeah. I'm just a dork though. That's pretty much why. Not like, not like one of those straight edge guys, I guess, but this was like destined to happen, right?
Yeah. So you've never had any curiosity about drinking or anything else?
Oh, my dad was from Italy, so I drank plenty as a kid. Like, all the time. I think my last beer ever, I was probably 13, and it was my dad and I in the garage shooting a BB gun at stuff. Like we each had like a beer. It was a cool memory. So it's like, I don't feel like you can top that anyway. Any new drinking memories, it's like a special memory for me. So I'm glad I went out like that, I guess,
Yeah. I don't even remember my last drink. I remember some of the last other stuff I did, but listen, we're not going to tell that story right now. But yeah, I don't drink anymore either. I don't think I knew you were straight edge.
Yeah. Just, my friend, when I was 15, there was this kid I met, and he had like a Jazz Fest shirt on, and I was just like a music geek, and I wanted to do some jazzy stuff. And he's actually the guy who kind of got me into the hardcore world. Like I knew about it a little bit before that, but I wasn't part of it by any means. And then I didn't know there was a local scene or anything.
Yeah.
So then he got me he started taking me to shows and stuff, and he was straight edge. So he like explained, there were like 3 guys in the car and me, and he explained the rules and all this stuff with it. Like, once you do it, you have to do it for life. Like, it sounded scary, but I didn't really like doing anything anyway. So it was a pretty easy decision.
I like that. I was pretty directionless. Discovering the scene and those friends and shows and everything like really gave me purpose. Still does. It's still what I like doing the best now.
Yeah, same, man. We're playing, I don't know when this is going to air or whatever, but we're playing Friday, and it's like one of my drum students is going to be there. And I get so excited about stuff like that. Like I love playing. So,
That's awesome.
You wouldn't think it from pictures of me because I look like I'm about to die because I'm old and still playing hardcore, but it's a lot of fun.
That's what we look like now. It just happens.
Right.
So why did you end up leaving Converge?
It was such a combination of things, like I don't know. I think I'm better at bands when I'm there from the ground floor because I can write the parts. Because it wasn't a lot of the drums. I tried to make it my own, and I think I probably tried way too hard because this is when you got like Chris Pinney's doing Dillinger, and there's all this excite. All of a sudden, hardcore isn't like just fast beats and stuff like that. It's like there's some. I'm not saying that the old guys in hardcore weren't incredibly skilled because that's not the case at all. I mean, like Mackie alone is such a killer drummer, but and many more obviously, but nobody was playing like Chris Pinney, right? And then you have like Candiria was on the scene. So many bands just throwing in chops that were not necessarily part of the scene. If they were, I didn't know about them in my limited, area of Virginia where the hardcore I took in. But
there was a lot of interesting stuff happening at the time. A lot of groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah, and I remember I thought I was pretty good. Like I took lessons. I was like listening to jazz, doing all this stuff, and then I see some of these guys, and it like the night before I quit, we played over Dillinger Escape Plan at this fest. It was like a few days before Halloween, and I had a lot of things going on in my life. Like, I was just starting to question everything, and like we said earlier, I didn't have it together, right? Even though I thought I'm doing this gig that I think is going to be my life, I wasn't all there. So, and everything's just kind of collapsing on me, like mentally, and I'm having a breakdown, and I'm like, I have this like. I'm terrified of playing over Dillinger, and Chris is like, we were pretty cool. So he's like right there watching me right beside the stage. And I just remember I was throwing in, thousands of extra notes that it was already a busy drum thing, but I was doing way too much trying to compete. And I don't know, there's video of it, but I'm sure I just made a complete ass of myself, just trying so hard. And then I just kind of had a breakdown after the show. And this is like, I'm really glad like iPhones and, video wasn't out there like it is as much now, because this would have been, I don't know if I could have survived this, but I was just like, I ended up completely like having like this emotional breakdown where I'm like crying outside of the venue because I knew I was going to quit the next day. And it was like, I was like, you think you're something in life. This is like my role. And I realized this wasn't what I was going to do. So I felt utterly lost. Right. And I'm just having this like inconsolable mess breakdown, and like there were so many kids out there that have to have witnessed this. And every time I meet someone from like the New England scene, I always ask, were you at that show? Do you remember this guy? Like, whatever, I'm putting it out there now. It's funny all these years later. It was not funny at the time, but I talked to another drummer friend of mine, and he said he had something similar when he played his last show with his band, because he was doing it for a living too. And he said, yeah, man, luckily for him, he was more tactful, and I think he hid like in some bleachers or something, and nobody saw, or some area where nobody saw him. But mine was quite public.
That's interesting, though, that you knew, right? And like you knew it wasn't for you, and that you made the decision to not do it. Because knowing me, I was such a mess when I was in my early 20s and mid 20s and late 20s, but that I wouldn't have been able to do anything. Like I don't know, I could only hold it together so long, but to be in that position and know you're not going to do it anymore, I think is respectable, because I probably would have just held on until someone asked me to leave, because I'm like, oh, it's this great band, I have to do it, and this is what I want to do.
Well, and I didn't really, I kind of got to the end of the question without answering it, but I really like they used a lot of double bass, and I never really was a great double bass drummer. I had some good nights and a lot of bad nights with it. So it was also that, like the chemistry of just trying to, me with the band, it wasn't a good fit. I mean, you can watch videos on YouTube, and I can show you a million different spots where it's evident that it's not a good fit, right? So, but it just wasn't. I don't know. I played like other like technical metal influenced hardcore and stuff, but that just wasn't the fit for me. So, every night was kind of stressful. Like, am I going to be able to play this part? Am I going to screw it up? And there was a lot of that. So and the Europe thing was a miserable tour though. It was like 30 shows in 31 nights. And that was like I had been out for like a week and a half at a time before that. So this was huge. And like, always in America and Canada. So everything was so different. And it was just, it had its fair share of misery for sure.
Yeah. Kurt mentioned that European tour was difficult, and I didn't even really consider that because in my mind, like I came into the scene and Converge was already like super well respected. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, they're like kind of big. They have it easy. But no, I guess that's not the case.
It didn't feel easy, man, at the time. I mean, maybe they had it easier than some bands probably, but it was like this thing where, I don't mean to suggest I was in it for the money, but if I could have made a living off it, I would have loved that. And I think it was like all these shows and it seemed like we were doing well. And then I think we were, Trey was counting the money in the airport on the way back. And I think we either like barely broke even which is good now. Like now it's like, but as a kid trying to like, not do anything but this, it didn't seem, I don't know. I was so in my head, it didn't seem sustainable. And like, I didn't even know how I was going to pay my rent for the month that I was gone and all that stuff. So it was just like a weird thing, but, and I'm glad they're doing great now, and that's not the case. It doesn't seem like they have those kind of tours anymore. So
yeah, it seems like they're doing okay now.
Yeah.
You still played some shows with them, right? Because I think there was still a tour you were on.
Right. It wasn't really a tour. It was just kind of select dates here and there between, probably, I don't know, maybe New Jersey and Montreal kind of range. I emailed everybody my notice. I think it was November 1st. So after I had emailed everybody my notice, which was early November, I ended up talking to Nate, I think, first. And, it was mentioned that there's still some shows booked. So I did my best to fulfill that. I went up like one or two times to play like a batch of shows over like long weekends and everything with them. And then it was I don't know, close to New Year's Eve. I was at work and I did something and I ended up breaking one of my fingers, and which I'm sure, telling them this is like a yeah, right kind of thing. I mean, it seems so perfect, but I really did mess up my finger. I was on like a splint and everything. And so I couldn't play. I guess there was one more show that I was supposed to play and I couldn't. And that was actually Ben's first show. And, I saw a YouTube video of it. It seems like it went pretty well. So, and I'm obviously everybody's happy that they got Ben as a replacement. So, there's no hard feelings anywhere that I would think.
Now, wait a second. Didn't Nate have everyone chant "fuck you, John" on the DVD?
I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Then everybody goes, "Fuck you, John," and I'm gonna mail that to him. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Fuck you, John. Thank you very much. All right, this is all done.
Was that a joke?
That was, well, I mean, I don't know if it was a joke at the time, but it's funny now, right? But yeah, so that was on a Long Road Home DVD, and there's a clip on YouTube of it, and that was that show. So that was my first show not being there. So yeah. We would have said that kind of stuff in person, right? I mean,
yeah.
that was definitely very much like the Virginia Beach vibe too, like just to say whatever, it was.
You said Virginia Beach was like the home of ball breaking, right?
As far as I knew, and I remember people going to shows or like people coming here for a show and not really getting the vibe. So I think anyone from here will, say the same thing. But yeah, it got pretty vicious, but there are some really funny people here, and it was, I don't know. I mean, people did have hurt feelings once in a while, but including myself, but it was a lot of fun. And in my travels, I did see that there were scenes that were very much not like this. So it was a cool place to be a part of for sure.
How about after Converge? I mean, have you stayed active in music? Have you always been doing stuff?
Well, aside from that night that I quit, I was considering selling my drums and being done, but that didn't happen. So yeah, I played when I got home and I started playing different stuff again, I started exploring outside of the hardcore world a little bit, and that was cool to like. I needed that to kind of validate myself as a musician, I guess, at the time. Like I can do more than one thing, and I started playing with like singer songwriters and this, and then I did a metallic hardcore band. I think it was '04. We played. It was called Into the Universe. And that was like a guy from, he had been in Jesuit, if you've ever heard of them. I don't know if you saw them in your
I like them and I know them, but I didn't see them. They were like just before my time.
Okay. So the bass player from that played guitar in it. And then my friend Ian was in it. He was in Channel a long time ago, and he's in Austin, Texas now. He still plays too. A few other guys. Everything was cool, but it just, that kind of exploded to probably my fault. I don't know. But then I stopped, and then I was like, I am definitely done with this. Like, I'm too old for this, because I was probably like 25 at the time. And then I still went to a show here and there, but I wasn't like my thing for a year or so. Then I had a kid, and that's a whole thing. But
how old were you when you had a kid?
I was 29 for another month, and then, but now my kid's a teenager. He does not care. Like, he's doing his own thing. So it's like I've been going to shows a lot more lately, like the last few years. So, and playing again and all that stuff. And it feels nice, like.
Yeah. Was there something that brought you back in particular to the music? Because like when I was 24, 25, I got into a band, so I was focused on that. And there was such violence at shows, I just didn't want to go anymore because I'm just sick of this. And I got really into post-rock, and I was listening to like a lot of classic post-hardcore too, like Quicksand and other stuff. So that just kind of took me in different directions. But actually, a few years later, Converge put out No Heroes. And then I was like, oh, they're awesome. This is still awesome. And maybe violence calmed down at shows a little bit. I don't know. I can't remember. But that kind of brought me back. Was there something that brought you back?
I remember when I first heard Praise, they were like, that was... I'm wearing a 7 Seconds shirt right now, right? I've always loved melodic hardcore. Like, I rarely played it, but that was always the band I wanted to be in. And then I heard some of their early stuff, and like they were playing, around close enough to where I was. So, but I never really left. I always still listen. Like, I remember listening to Nails a lot, because I thought that was their first couple records were killer. And God, I'm drawing a blank, but there's a lot of bands I was still listening to, But yeah, Praise was the one where I was like, damn it, I need to start a melodic hardcore band one of these days. And then, we tried and failed for like 3-4 years after that. But,
Yeah. So how about your current band, Mean Jesus? When does it get started? How does it get started?
Okay, so Keith from that band and me, we played in a few different bands. One of them actually had like a couple of the guys that later went on to be in this band, a really good local band called Spike Pit. We were playing with them, and I think we were kind of post-hardcore. I don't even know. And we had like a couple songs, but that didn't really work. I think people just started quitting, and it was over. Keith and we did this a few different times, and it just always fizzled out. But then I guess we got the right combination of people, and Mean Jesus started, and it was more of like a Sam I Am meets Lifetime type of sound at first, which is kind of my dream band, like, right? Like, that's what I always wanted to do. And then we started, throwing in heavy little bits here and there. And then that became more of the sound in more recent days, but it's not like metal. So it's still very hardcore, and I really enjoy playing it still. Cause like the drums are pretty much the same as I would have played. And regardless of, and we still have plenty of melody and everything. I'm not talking bad about it. I absolutely love it, but yeah, it's just the weird, the way a band evolves from, the way it starts to the way it is now. And we were way better than when we started. So I'm not, like that's, you can do a sound test and find that, but.
Yeah, I feel like that happens a lot. Even my band now, in the way I pictured how it would sound in my head doesn't seem to be the direction at all that it's going. And I'm like, I just got to go with it. This is what's coming out.
And that's the best thing to do. I don't want to cling to some idea that, especially if it's not going to work or you don't even really want it to work anymore, just go with wherever the creative process takes you, and I think you're doing the right thing there.
How did your band evolve from more Sam I Am Lifetime sounding to what we hear in Mean Jesus now, because it is a traditional hardcore sound, not like Youth Crew, the kind of old style sounding, but like, heavy, but not the metallic kind, just good, heavy, traditional sounding hardcore. How did it go in that direction?
Well, it is a kind of, it's a confusing history because I forgot our first song we ever did was one that we've recorded 2 or 3 times now. It's called Pursuit of Guilt. And that one had like this kind of New York hardcore vibe that I heard somebody asked like a punk show DJ to play it. He thought we were from New York. So that's what made that comparison click in my head. But that one was pretty heavy for the first part of the song. And that was a song that we were going to record, and we almost didn't even record it because it didn't fit in with the rest of the songs. And then that later became the only song we took from the first era. So it is funny that our first song kind of had the blueprint all along, and we didn't really, we were trying to go away from it, but then we ended up going more in that direction. So, but it's like you always want a heavy part in a song. Like if you look at the old Lifetime stuff, they kind of had those breakdowns, like on Background. They had the breakdowns where it gets heavy and everything. So I mean, it's always fun to throw those parts in, and then it's like, you just keep making heavier stuff to go with the melodic stuff. And, I'm not a songwriter at all, so I'm probably butchering the way this all played out. But I mean, I play drums. So.
Look, I like that. I'd like drummers that are just super competent drummers, and that's all they do. We need that. You're in short supply. Because I can't drum for shit. I can play bass, I can play guitar, I could do different types of vocals, but I'm awful on drums.
Well, I have a bass guitar right off camera here that my friend, I don't know if he gave it to me or, lifetime loan or anything, but it's not working out for me. So,
have you tried to play guitar or anything else like that ever?
No, I really want to play bass, but I want to take lessons, and I just haven't really. I don't know. I told myself I was going to start teaching drum lessons, which I do, and I love it. And then any money I made from that, I was going to put towards bass lessons. But then it's like, the more lessons I teach, the less time to actually take bass lessons I have, and so on. So I haven't done much with it yet.
Do you know the string names and how to read basic tablature?
Yes, I'm looking at it. I could remember the string names, and then the tab stuff. Yeah, I can figure that out. But
yeah, just learn easy songs. Like I would just look up Weezer tabs on Ultimate Guitar or whatever back in the day and play those songs.
I learned I think 2 U2 songs off Joshua Tree, but the tab I saw, it's all on one string. But then I watched a dude do it on YouTube, and he was using all the strings. So I don't think it sounds okay, but I don't think I'm doing it right,
Everyone does it different anyway. You always hear musicians say, like, when people cover stuff or it's on YouTube, like, it's always wrong.
Yeah, for sure. But I want to be, good at it. I don't just want to get by. So that's the problem. And, I've been playing drums since 1988, right? So it's stupid if I measure myself on the same level as, this budding bass player. Because, I won't live long enough probably to get there. So, yeah.
Mean Jesus released 2 new singles this year, Chains and Teeth. Now, is this leading to a bigger release, or is it just these 2 new singles? You never know these days because everyone does the single lead up.
Yeah. Right now, we had those 2 written for a while, and we really wanted to record them. We're kind of trying to not be one of those bands that just has songs and never records them. So we had 2, and we wanted to get them laid down and everything. So we're still writing more stuff, but at the time of those release, it was just let's just get these out there because, we like them a lot, and just get them out there, see what happens. So yeah, nothing else is baked enough yet to put out there, but we're working on some new stuff still.
I love that you referenced, there was a drum part in a Dillinger Escape Plan song. I think it was Sandbox Magician.
Yeah, I rip it off so hard. It was intentional, right? But I rip it off because I love that fill, and I had this little gap where I need to do something. So I think it's a note for note recreation of it, but I think I do it on different drums or something. I mean, obviously it's not going to sound as good as Chris is playing no matter what I do, but yeah, stuff like that. It's kind of,
I love hearing that because I would have never picked it up if you didn't tell me. What song was that on again? Was it Chains or Teeth?
Yeah, no, I get those 2. They're still, oh man, this is embarrassing. So to me, they're still New Fast and New Slow.
All right, it's either new fast or new slow. But like the same thing happened at my band practice. The drummer was like, "Oh, did you notice this Poison the Well style thing I did here?" And I was like, "No." But then he showed me what it actually was, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I love that."
Yeah, if any drummer says they don't do this, they're just lying or they're unaware because you get influenced by what you hear. So I like it. Like I think it's cool to do it. I'm pretty sure it's on Teeth. It's on the slower of the two new ones, so it's on the second one.
Okay, yeah, I'm not afraid to talk about my influences. I think some people like pretend that they don't have them sometimes or don't want to talk about it, but I just say, here's the bands I listened to that made this.
I do have a funny one. I had this one fill I do in a song, and I thought it was from this one Slayer song. And then I was listening to like Sirius XM, like the hair metal channel. And I remember it was actually from, I think it's Warrant's Uncle Tom's Cabin. I don't know if you're familiar with the song, but he does this kind of cool fill at the very end of the song. And that it is a ripoff of that, not Slayer. So I don't know if I just ruined my credibility there or anything, but yeah.
No, I feel like a Warrant ripoff is kind of cool.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, the guy was a good drummer, so.
Yeah. How did you start teaching drums? That's a recent development, right?
Yeah. I had a friend who our kids were on the crew team together, and I don't know how it came up where we started talking about stuff, and I mentioned playing drums, and he said his kid was really interested in like punk rock and all this stuff, and we talked about doing lessons, and then I only had one student, and it was that kid, and I wanted to make sure like they seemed to be advancing week to week before I kind of put it out there. I wanted to make sure I wasn't like a total hack or anything. And, I'm seeing progress. So then I put something out like on Instagram saying, hey, if anybody wants drum lessons, like I'm doing this now. And I got a few more students as a result of that. So just kind of happened. But it's so cool. Like they're all like more or less like part of the scene too. So it's kind of cool to be like you were saying, there's no drummers, right? So maybe, I don't know, a couple of years, maybe they'll be ready now. I don't know. Like they're all at different levels and everything, but it's cool. Like just seeing them grow and like putting like helping develop new drummers out there, like it's so rewarding and it's just been awesome.
So what's next for Mean Jesus? We have Abomination, the 2023 record, which I encourage everybody to go check out. We've got Chains and Teeth, the new singles that came out this year. I see that you've been playing some shows down there and other places. What can we expect in 2025?
We're looking to do some Northeast stuff maybe around springtime. So if anyone's interested, please hit us up for that. We're just kind of putting it out there now. We've talked to a few bands here and there, but we don't have any concrete plans yet. So that'll probably be the next thing. And then we've been down south before. We might do that again. It's always fun. I'd love to play out west, but it's like a logistical thing,
Yeah, I've just started trying to book shows for my band, and I find it to be impossible. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, locally it's fine. Richmond we do pretty well. We've always had fun there. So the singer of our band, he handles this pretty great, right? Like I know people, but a lot of people I know are my age, and they're like, "Dude, I have no idea who still books shows," like. So it's hit or miss.
How's the fitness going lately? Now, everyone, you must know that I have consulted John here about running because I started running back in May to try and get in shape for the gigs I had earlier this year, and then I kept up with it. And now I've kind of fallen off lately, one, out of laziness, and two, I was losing too much weight, right? So, like, I cut the running down to like once or twice a week until got my weight back up where I wanted it, which I did. So now I realize like there's this whole thing, right? Like making sure you eat enough, cycling in the right amount of exercise. This is all new to me, and I'm figuring it all out. So like, here's where I'm at, John. I haven't fallen off so hard that I'm doing nothing, right? And when I do work out, it's not like I'm hurting everywhere and I feel like I have to start all over again. But I'm not doing enough that I feel good. So I'm committing this week to like getting back into it and trying to get more on a schedule. How's it been going for you?
Yeah, I'm in probably a similar place. I mean, I still run here and there, but stuff will hurt more easily now that I'm old and everything. And I lift weights still. I haven't been in a while, but I at least do like push-ups around the house, and I have a pull-up bar. I mean, I'm hardly like your perfect specimen of like I'm sure you've had, hundreds of fitter guests than me, but like I feel like a fraud even answering this. But
hey, but you're who I talked to about this.
Yeah, I mean, I did a 5K with my son the other weekend.
See, that's impressive. I still haven't run 2 continuous miles. I need to hit that at one point, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, it sounds like it might be your like nutrition then, like because you were saying you started losing a lot of weight and everything, so that could be it. But like for me, eating enough has never been a problem my whole life. Like it's quite the opposite of that. So but I just like I take a lot of walks and everything. I mean, I do it. I've been going to a lot of yoga lately, which has been kind of killer. Like up to 5 days a week of that. So that's
oh wow,
great. Yeah, maybe only 1 week I actually hit 5, but now I have like a monthly pass, so I'm too like cheap to not use it because I'm paying for it. So that's been pretty cool.
Excellent. Well, I hope that Mean Jesus makes it up here to the Northeast so that I can meet you in person. And I love what you guys are doing. Please keep it up. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.